The soft hum of the shuttle's engines faded as the landing gear engaged, pressing against the dense, uncharted soil of the planet designated as X-47. The training mission was supposed to be straightforward: set up a temporary base, survey the terrain, and return with samples for analysis. Nothing about the assignment suggested it would be extraordinary, and yet, as the airlock hissed open, Lieutenant Scott Clark couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about this world. Stepping onto the planet's surface, he adjusted his visor to filter out the glaring twin suns overhead. His boots sank slightly into the thick, dark pool soil, and a faint scent of something metallic filled his nostrils, even through the suit's filtration system. Around him, towering trees with iridescent, translucent leaves stretched toward the sky, their branches shifting subtly, as if reacting to the arrival of foreign beings. The planet was eerily silent. No chirping insects, no distant roars of predators, only the occasional rustling of foliage as the wind passed through. Behind him, a group of cadets disembarked, each moving with precise, disciplined motions. Unlike Scott, who had joined the Galactic Academy as an experiment to test human adaptability in interstellar service, the others were various alien species with years of training under their belts. Commander Vortek, a towering reptilian officer with skin that shimmered like polished obsidian, took the lead, his deep voice crackling over the comms. "Cadets, you have 48 hours to establish a working base and complete your survival objectives. We will reconvene at the designated point for extraction. No unnecessary risks. Follow protocol." Scott nodded out of habit, though he knew the order wasn't directed at him specifically. Since the first day at the academy, he had felt the weight of being an outsider. Humans were still relatively new to interstellar relations, and though their physical resilience was acknowledged, they were seen as unpredictable, too curious, too impulsive, too reliant on instinct rather than rigid strategic planning. He had spent months proving himself capable, but he had never truly shaken the feeling that he was being observed, assessed, and perhaps even doubted. As the cadets began unpacking supplies and setting up a perimeter, Scott took his designated role as a surveyor, moving toward the outer edges of their assigned zone. His suit's scanners displayed basic readings: breathable air, moderate gravity, no immediate threats detected, but there was something unusual in the energy readings. Fluctuations that didn't align with any natural formations. He glanced back at the others. They were focused on building shelters and running soil analyses. If he reported an anomaly without concrete proof, it would be dismissed as human imagination. Against better judgment, he stepped further away from the group, adjusting the scanner's sensitivity. The readings grew stronger, pulsing faintly like a hidden signal. He felt his pulse quicken. If there was something buried here, an unknown energy source, a ruin, or even an abandoned outpost, it would be worth investigating. The dense foliage made visibility difficult, but he maneuvered through the twisting roots and hanging vines, brushing past leaves that shimmered under his touch. The deeper he went, the more pronounced the anomaly became. Soon the trees thinned, revealing something that made him stop in his tracks. Ahead of him stood a structure, ancient, massive, and unmistakably artificial. It was made of a dark, metallic material, its surface covered in intricate carvings that looked too deliberate to be natural. The shape resembled a temple or a monument, but it was partially buried beneath layers of time, with thick vines crawling up its sides. The air around it felt heavier, charged with something unseen yet undeniable. His heart pounded as he activated his communicator. "Commander, this is Clark. I've found something. It looks like ruins." "Coordinates incoming." Silence. Frowning, he checked his device, only to see the signal flickering. The interference was strong. He tried again, but the result was the same: static. Either the structure was emitting some kind of disruption, or the planet's atmosphere was affecting communications. Either way, he was on his own. Scott hesitated. The protocol was clear: report findings and wait for backup. But if he left now, there was no guarantee the signal would improve, and by the time he returned with the others, the anomaly might shift, or worse, vanish. His curiosity won. Slowly he approached the entrance, his fingers trailing over the symbols etched into the surface. They were old, yet not worn by time. If anything, they seemed preserved, as if resisting decay. Some of the markings looked strangely familiar, but he couldn't place why. With a deep breath, he stepped inside. The air changed instantly. It was cooler, almost unnaturally so, and the silence became absolute. The walls glowed faintly, as though reacting to his presence. He took another step forward, scanning the interior. The structure was vast, with corridors stretching into darkness, and at the center of the chamber a pedestal stood, covered in the same alien script. Something told him that this was more than just ruins. It was a discovery that could change everything. The cold air inside the structure sent a slight shiver down Scott's spine as he moved deeper into the chamber. The walls pulsed faintly, casting a dim glow that flickered with an almost rhythmic consistency. The symbols carved into the metallic surface seemed to shift subtly, as though reacting to his presence. His suit's scanner continued to malfunction, displaying erratic readings that made little sense. He exhaled slowly, adjusting his helmet's visor to enhance visibility. The room ahead was vast, its ceiling lost in the shadows. Columns lined the perimeter, their surfaces inscribed with the same intricate markings that covered the entrance. At the center, the pedestal stood in eerie isolation, its dark surface smoothed despite the age of the surrounding structure. Unlike the rest of the ruins, it bore no dust or overgrowth, as if untouched by time. Scott approached cautiously, his pulse steady but heightened with anticipation. The energy fluctuations he had detected earlier seemed to emanate from this precise location. He ran a gloved hand over the pedestal, feeling a strange warmth beneath his fingertips. His instinct told him that whatever this was, it had not been abandoned completely. He crouched down, inspecting the base of the structure. A faint seam separated the pedestal from the ground, suggesting that it could move, or perhaps had once served as a control panel. His fingers traced the edges, searching for any form of activation mechanism. As he leaned in closer, a sudden shift in the air sent a tingling sensation across his skin. A soft hum resonated through the chamber. Scott froze. The glow from the walls intensified, pulsing brighter in quick succession. He took a step back, his instincts screaming at him to retreat, but before he could react further, the pedestal emitted a low vibration. A faint blue light emerged from its center, spiraling upward before forming into a translucent shape. A figure materialized before him. The hologram flickered, stabilizing into the form of a tall, humanoid entity. Its elongated features bore an air of solemnity, its eyes glowing with an inner luminescence. The being's attire, though spectral, resembled ornate robes, flowing weightlessly as if caught in an unseen current. It observed Scott in silence, tilting its head slightly. Scott's breath caught in his throat. This was no mere recording. The figure's eyes locked onto him with intent, studying him as much as he was studying it. His instincts warred between curiosity and caution, but he remained rooted in place. Then, the being spoke. The voice was melodic, yet carried an unnatural resonance, as though layered with multiple frequencies. The language was unfamiliar, the syllables flowing in a way that his translator struggled to process. Words flickered across his visor, attempting to form a coherent translation. Unknown origin, anomaly detected, verification required. The fragmented translation sent a surge of adrenaline through Scott's system. The entity was aware of his presence. More than that, it was analyzing him. His mind raced. Who had built this place? How long had it been abandoned? And why did this being, whether artificial intelligence or something else, seem to recognize him as an anomaly? The hologram continued to study him, its gaze unblinking. Scott exhaled slowly, forcing himself to remain calm. If this was an automated security system, any sign of aggression could trigger a response. He raised his hands slightly, a universal gesture of non-hostility. "I'm not here to harm anything," he said, his voice steady despite the tension coiling in his muscles. "I found this place by accident." The entity's expression remained unreadable, but its glowing eyes flickered momentarily, as if processing his words. The air between them grew heavier, charged with an unspoken intensity. Then, without warning, the pedestal beneath the hologram shifted. The smooth surface cracked open, revealing a recessed compartment within. Scott took a cautious step closer, peering inside. Resting within the hidden chamber was an object. Small, metallic, and shaped like an intricate sphere covered in the same inscriptions that adorned the walls. The hologram's voice returned, clearer this time. "Artifact integrity preserved. Retrieval authorized." Scott hesitated. His training told him to report discoveries before interacting with unknown technology, but his gut told him this was a rare opportunity. He reached down, carefully lifting the sphere. It was cool to the touch, yet he could feel a faint energy pulsing from within, as though it was alive. The moment his fingers fully encased it, the entire room responded. The walls surged with energy, the glowing symbols shifting like moving water. The hologram straightened, its gaze locking onto him with newfound intensity. "Identification confirmed," it declared. Scott barely had time to register the words before his visor's display was flooded with data. Lines of symbols flashed rapidly, overlapping in chaotic patterns before stabilizing into something that made his breath hitch. It was a map, not just of this structure, but of an entire network of locations spread across multiple planets. And at the center of it all, highlighted with unmistakable precision, was Earth. Scott's grip on the artifact tightened. Whatever he had just activated, it had identified his origin. And if the ruins had a direct connection to Earth, it meant that humanity's history was far more intertwined with the stars than anyone had ever imagined. The weight of the revelation settled in his chest, but before he could process it further, the hologram spoke again. "Awakening sequence initiated. Prepare for contact." The chamber trembled. The realization hit him like a physical force. He hadn't just found an ancient ruin. He had triggered something that had been waiting, and now it was waking up. The chamber trembled violently as the walls pulsed with an intensity that made Scott's visor momentarily flicker with static. The artifact in his hand radiated a low, steady hum, and for a brief moment he wondered if he had just made a catastrophic mistake. The hologram stood motionless, its glowing eyes locked onto him, as if waiting for something beyond his comprehension. The symbols covering the walls moved with a fluidity that defied logic, rearranging themselves into new patterns, as though responding to a command long buried beneath time itself. The rumbling beneath his feet intensified, and he barely managed to steady himself as the floor beneath the pedestal cracked apart, revealing a spiraling staircase descending into darkness. The ancient mechanism had remained sealed for an unimaginable length of time, yet it moved effortlessly, as if its creators had only just left it behind. A gust of stale, dust-ridden air rushed upward from the revealed passage, carrying with it the scent of something metallic, something untouched for eons. Scott hesitated for only a second before stepping forward. His instincts screamed caution, but curiosity propelled him onward. He had already come this far. Turning back was no longer an option. The hologram followed his movement, its ethereal form gliding soundlessly beside him. "Descent authorized," it intoned, its voice reverberating in a way that suggested the structure itself was listening. Initiating final sequence. With careful steps, Scott made his way down the staircase. The deeper he went, the colder the air became, though not in a natural way. It was a sterile cold, like the sensation of walking into a cryogenic facility. The walls, though still covered in intricate carvings, were smoother here, polished to a degree that reflected his suit's faint glow. Whatever lay at the bottom had been preserved with extreme precision. After what felt like an eternity, he reached the end of the staircase. The passage opened into a cavernous hall, stretching far beyond what should have been possible. Massive pillars lined the space, each covered in the same shifting symbols that had responded to him before. At the far end of the hall, a towering structure loomed, a monolithic slab of dark metal embedded with crystalline veins that pulsed in slow, deliberate rhythms. Scott moved forward cautiously, his breath steady but shallow. The artifact in his hand vibrated in sync with the pulses of the crystalline veins, as if the two were connected. He stepped closer, and as he did, the massive slab groaned and shuddered. The air grew thick with tension, a force pressing down on him like the weight of history itself. Then the slab split apart. A sound, deep and resonant like 1,000 voices whispering at once, filled the chamber. From within the split monolith, a figure emerged. Scott's heart pounded in his chest as the being took its first step forward. Its form was humanoid, yet impossibly elegant. Tall, its features smooth yet defined, skin shimmering with an opalescent hue. Its eyes, twin voids of swirling energy, locked onto him. Unlike the hologram, this figure was undeniably real. For several agonizing seconds, neither of them moved. Scott's fingers twitched over his wrist communicator, but his instincts told him that calling for backup now would be meaningless. Whatever he had awakened, it had been waiting, and now it was here. The being inhaled, as though drawing its first breath in a millennium. When it finally spoke, its voice was layered with something ancient, something that carried the weight of a civilization long forgotten. "You are the first," it said, its tone neither hostile nor welcoming, but something in between. "The bloodline endures." Scott swallowed hard, his mind racing to process the words. Bloodline? Endures? He had expected to find relics, maybe lost data, but not something alive. The being studied him with unnerving intensity, then slowly extended a hand toward the artifact he still held. "It has returned," it murmured, and so the cycle begins again. Scott wasn't sure whether to relinquish the sphere or hold on to it, but his body acted before his mind could catch up. He lifted the artifact toward the being, and the moment it made contact with its palm, a surge of energy erupted through the chamber. The monolith behind them ignited with golden light, illuminating symbols that had not seen the stars in untold centuries. The entire structure seemed to exhale, awakening from a slumber that defied time itself. Scott felt the pulse of something greater than himself, something vast, incomprehensible, and utterly undeniable. The being's gaze did not waver. "Prepare yourself, human," it said. "For what you have set in motion cannot be undone." And with those words, the hall rumbled, signaling that the past was no longer content to remain buried. The golden light from the monolith surged outward, filling the chamber with a blinding brilliance. Scott instinctively shielded his eyes, but even through his visor, the intensity burned against his retinas. His body tensed as an unfamiliar sensation coursed through his limbs, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through every cell in his body. It was not pain, but something else entirely, as though the very air around him was rewriting itself. The being before him stood motionless, its expression unreadable, but there was no mistaking the shift in its stance. It no longer looked at him as an outsider. It regarded him as something expected. Then, as suddenly as the surge had begun, the light retracted. The chamber dimmed, leaving only the pulsing glow of the monolith and the faint shimmer of the symbols dancing across its surface. Scott let out a slow breath, his heart pounding against his ribs. His grip on the artifact had loosened, but he still held it firmly in his palm. Before he could speak, his communicator crackled to life. "Clark, what the hell is going on down there?" Commander Vortek's voice burst through the static laced with controlled urgency. Scott inhaled sharply, steadying himself before responding. "Commander, He hesitated, his mind scrambling for the right words. How could he possibly explain what had just happened? That he had awoken something ancient? That the ruins weren't just ruins, but a gateway to knowledge far beyond what the Galactic Academy had ever encountered? "I found something," he finally said, his voice tight with the weight of the understatement. "Something alive." Silence followed. Then Vortex's voice returned, sharper now. "Stay where you are. I'm sending a retrieval team." Scott clenched his jaw. Of course that was the response. The Academy operated under strict protocol, and any unclassified discoveries, especially ones as significant as this, would be immediately contained, analyzed, and likely buried beneath layers of bureaucratic secrecy. He turned his gaze back to the being, who had not moved. It continued to watch him, its eyes reflecting the light of the monolith behind it. "What happens now?" Scott asked, more to himself than to the being. The response came in the form of a slow, deliberate motion. The being raised its hand, palm outward, and the artifact in Scott's grasp pulsed once before dissolving into a stream of golden particles. The remnants swirled in the air before absorbing into the monolith, causing a deep, resonant chime to echo through the hall. The being finally spoke, its voice a smooth cadence that sent shivers down Scott's spine. "Now we are seen." Before he could question the meaning of those words, the entire structure responded. The walls trembled, the symbols flared, and a pulse of energy shot upward, through the ceiling and beyond. Scott had no doubt. The signal had been sent. But to whom? His communicator buzzed again, and this time there was no mistaking the edge in the commander's voice. "Clark, we just detected an energy spike from your coordinates. What did you do?" Scott's fingers twitched over his wrist display. "It wasn't me." He paused, eyes still locked on the being before him. "It was waiting for me." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for a moment too long. Then Vortex exhaled sharply. "I want you out of there, now!" Scott hesitated. He had no idea what he had just activated, but leaving now felt wrong. He had opened something that had been locked away for who knows how long. And if this being, this guardian, had been waiting for him, then walking away would mean losing whatever answers it held. But orders were orders. Before he could make a decision, a deep rumble reverberated through the chamber, different from the previous tremors. This wasn't the ruins shifting. This was coming from outside. The Guardian lifted its gaze, its glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "Your kind arrives." Scott tensed. The retrieval team. That was fast. Too fast. Had the energy surge drawn them here faster than expected? Or worse, had it attracted something else entirely? His communicator flared to life again, but this time the voice on the other end was not Vortex. It was one of the cadets, their voice shaking with barely contained alarm. "Sir, we have a problem." Scott's breath hitched. "What kind of problem?" There was a pause, then a short burst of static before the reply came through. "We're not the only ones responding to that signal." The weight of those words settled like a stone in Scott's chest. Whatever had been set in motion was bigger than just him, bigger than the Academy, and now the past wasn't just waking up, it was calling something back. Scott's heart pounded as the transmission crackled with static. He clenched his fist, his mind racing. If someone else had detected the signal, it meant they had either been waiting for it or had the capability to track something beyond what the Academy could. Neither option was comforting. The Guardian stood motionless, its eyes locked on the monolith as though listening to something Scott could not hear. The flickering symbols along the walls pulsed faster, responding to an unseen force. A low vibration resonated through the structure, rising in intensity with every passing second. Scott activated his communicator. "Commander, who else is responding?" Vortex's voice came back, sharp and controlled. "Unknown vessels entering orbit, not Academy ships. Their signatures don't match anything in our database." Scott's grip on his wrist display tightened. Unidentified ships. That meant trouble. The Guardian finally turned to him. "It has begun." Scott exhaled sharply. What has? The Guardian stepped forward, its presence casting an unnatural stillness in the air. The awakening was not a message, it said. It was a beacon, and now, those who sought to keep this place buried will come to silence it. Scott's stomach twisted. He had assumed the ruins had been abandoned, lost to time, but now he understood. Someone had sealed this place deliberately. Someone had wanted it forgotten. Before he could respond, the entire structure shook violently. Dust rained down from the ceiling as the monolith's glow flared into a brilliant cascade of gold. The Guardian raised its hand, palm outward, and the symbols along the walls responded instantly, shifting into new patterns. The deep hum in the air changed, as though the ruins were bracing themselves. Scott's communicator buzzed again, but this time it was chaos on the other end. "Sir, the ships!" A burst of static cut through. "They're deploying something. The transmission cut out. Scott's jaw clenched. He had seconds to decide. Stay and risk whatever was coming, or retreat to the surface and hope they weren't already surrounded. The Guardian seemed to read his hesitation. "You cannot fight what comes," it said, "but you can decide how this ends." Scott forced himself to focus. "Tell me what I need to do." The Guardian stepped closer. "You are human. That alone is why this place responded to you." It gestured toward the monolith. It was built not only to preserve knowledge, but to return it to those who were meant to wield it. Scott frowned. "You mean, you were never meant to be forgotten," the Guardian interrupted. "Humanity's past did not begin on Earth. It began among the stars." The words sent a chill down Scott's spine. He had suspected as much when he first saw Earth's location at the center of the artifact's map, but hearing it confirmed was something else entirely. The ground shuddered again, this time followed by a distant explosion from above. Whatever was coming, it was here. The Guardian extended its hand, and in its palm a new artifact materialized. A smaller version of the first, but glowing with an intensity that suggested it held far more than just coordinates. "This knowledge must not be lost again," the Guardian said. "Take it. Leave this place before it is buried once more." Scott didn't hesitate. He grabbed the artifact, feeling the warmth of its energy seep through his suit. "What about you?" he asked. The Guardian stepped back toward the monolith. "My purpose has been fulfilled." The meaning was clear. The Guardian had waited for someone to unlock this place, to reclaim what had been lost. Now, its task was complete. Scott's communicator crackled one last time. "Clark! We need to extract now." He turned and ran, retracing his steps through the crumbling ruins. The staircase he had descended only moments ago now trembled with each step, debris crashing from above. The ancient structure was collapsing, whether from the activation of the beacon or the approaching forces trying to bury it. Bursting out of the ruins, he barely had time to register the sight above him. The sky was ablaze with movement. Unfamiliar ships clashed with the Academy's vessels, energy bolts streaking through the atmosphere in violent arcs. The Academy's shuttle was waiting just beyond the tree line, engines flaring with urgency. He sprinted toward it, dodging the tremors shaking the ground beneath him. As he neared the shuttle's open ramp, a final explosion rocked the landscape, sending a shockwave that nearly knocked him off his feet. He stumbled forward, gripping the side of the hatch as he pulled himself inside. The moment his boots hit the floor, the ship lifted off. He collapsed into the nearest seat, his breath coming in ragged gulps. The artifact pulsed softly in his hands, its warmth steady, constant. He glanced up as Vortek approached, his reptilian eyes locked onto the object. "What the hell did you find down there?" the commander asked, his voice quiet but heavy with meaning. Scott met his gaze, the truth. Vortek studied him for a moment before nodding. "We'll debrief once we're clear." The ship angled sharply, leaving the planet's surface behind. Outside the viewport, the battle continued, but Scott barely registered it. His mind was elsewhere. This wasn't just a discovery, it was proof. Humanity had not simply evolved on Earth in isolation. Their past was written in the stars, hidden away for reasons yet unknown. Someone had tried to erase it, someone had succeeded, but now that past had been reclaimed, and no force in the galaxy could bury it again.